Hey guys, what it do? It's your boy Supreme Uchiha, the God man. Listen. I want to talk about Gojo and I want to talk about Sukuna, but specifically I want to talk about those geniuses and how they differ and how, I believe that they both have the highest potential in well, I don't know about the highest potential. I think Utah and Yuji might be up there with the highest potential, to be honest, but basically why they became the strongest, why they became calamities in their own right. Gojo's genius, I think, is in his ability to be creative. He's a creative genius, right? Interestingly, but he's not a fundamentalist. He's not a fundamentalist genius, right? The only thing about him that I would say is maybe fundamentalist is maybe he's hand-to-hand combat. He's insanely good at hand-to-hand combat. I think far superior than Sukuna. And then, Sukuna, on the other hand, is the guy that can just see something and learn it immediately. I don't want to say he's like a taskmaster, but he has similar capabilities in terms of, like, he sees a technique, if it's obviously not an innate technique, and he sees somebody's application of curse energy in Jujutsu, and he can adapt that and mimic it and do it immediately. We saw this when Gojo healed his brain, or the part of his brain that deals with domain expansions, right? Because neither of them wanted to wait for cooldown to complete. Both of them have very rapid cooldown times, but against each other, that amount of time is just too much time to allow the other person to have, right? So that's why they both opted to cool their brains forcefully. But Gojo's genius is the fact that he could do this on his own, without any framework, without any data, without anything really. He just thought about it and did it, right? He was like, okay, how do I overcome this wall? And that's what Gojo is good at. If he sees a wall, he's great at overcoming that wall, but he needs to see the wall in front of him. And then from there, he will come up with a way to circumpass or to bypass that said wall. The same thing with the open barrier. It seemed like Gojo was not aware of it, but he was confident in his own domain expansion, not proficiency, domain expansion. What's the word that he uses? But basically the quality of his domain expansion, right? And they were clashing and drawing. Now, a lot of people say that Sukuna should have been able to use the furnace in the first clash because he didn't change any of his properties. But this is not true. Sukuna continuously changes the properties of his domain expansion in order to combat Gojo's domain expansion, because both of the domain is so potent, right? In order to get the edge, you have to change properties. Sukuna wanted to win the domain expansion clash in the first place, so he was actively changing the properties of his domain expansion in order to try to out-muscle Gojo. But obviously, it could have been by increasing the strength of the attack outside. It could have been by increasing the potency of it inside. It could have been with whatever many means. We don't really get full explanations with this manga sometimes, which I think I like because it leaves room for openness and dialogue and discussion, right? You can believe that. You can believe that Sukuna could do the furnace, even though the narrator clearly says that Sukuna's furnace was cool throughout Gojo's fight. It never says, it was cool later in the fight or in the second expansion or in the third expansion. It was just cool the whole time. It was cool the whole time because it could not rev its engine, essentially, because of the domain expansion it was against, the quality of the domain expansion it was against, for whatever reason, right? Whether you believe it's because Sukuna was changing properties like I do, or whether you believe it's just because they clashed for so long that the furnace didn't get an opportunity to heat up. Whatever it is you want to believe, the fact of the matter is Sukuna could not use this. And we know that he couldn't do this because if he was not aware that Gojo could survive his domain expansion, right? Sukuna is gonna smile through everything, but he was not aware, right? That's why even when Gojo's brain rot happened, he was like, "What are you? Just a nameless fish?" And he was ready to just kill him right there and then. If his whole goal was to find a way to unlock or to expand his curse technique as people claim, then he would not have tried to open his domain expansion at that point, right? He would have just tried to fight him hand to hand, get Maharaga out, and try to get that cleave to happen. But that's not what happens. He tries to open the domain expansion and kill Gojo there and there. But guess what? His domain expansion also collapses, right? So, but we'll get to that later. But basically, the genius here is that Sukuna, seeing that Gojo somehow found a way to heal his brain immediately, was able to then heal his brain immediately as well, right? If Gojo did not do that and he was on cooldown, Gojo would have won the fight. But, Gojo needed to do that so that he's not on cooldown. So it's an interesting debacle. But that's the genius of Gojo. Same as with reverse curse technique. Gojo saw Shoko do it, whatever, and he just could not figure it out. He could not know how it works because he's not that type of learner, right? He's one of those people that has to apply it. He has to do something and see a wall and then climb the wall. So when he had this fight against Toji, the wall was right there, death. And therefore, he unlocked reverse curse energy because he finally understood it at that moment. And then he creatively did it on his own. This is what Gojo is good at. Sukuna, on the other hand, we know he had to learn how to turn himself into a curse object from Kenjaku. Had to learn the word slash from Maharaga, right? Had to he probably learned open domain expansion as well from Kenjaku. We haven't seen him creatively do anything by himself, right? Even him applying the furnace into his domain expansion, he probably got that from somebody. If not, that's just how his specific course technique works, because it's to do with cooking, so he has multiple applications. But he's not really a person that has showcased creativity to the same level as Gojo Satoru. But his genius is that he can see something, understand it, and then replicate it. Gojo, on the other hand, needs to fundamentally understand it himself and then come up with a solution in his own way. That's what Gojo's good at. And that's why they're both geniuses, but completely different. One has its advantages and so does the other. The advantage for Gojo is that he can be put in a situation never before seen and come out of it because he can come up with a solution there and then, right? Him using the prison realm as some kind of as like a eureka moment against Sukuna to be like, okay, I can try this and that might work. While Sukuna would need to, maybe experience that, but I think he'd need somebody to actually apply the curse energy version of that technique in order for him to figure that out. And I think the problem here against the Utah versus Sukuna fight right now, spoilers alert, I think is that obviously he saw Gojo make his domain expansion small and change the properties in order to match his own. So he might just do the same to match Utah and try to overwhelm Utah in that way. So this is another thing that we have to pay attention to when it occurs here. And I'm talking about both of the geniuses because they are both geniuses. Now, which genius type do you prefer? I think Sukuna's one is probably the easier route, because the more people you fight, the more things you go through, the more applications of your own curse technique you can almost learn and wean off of, or just curse energy that you can steal and grab. While Gojo has to essentially experience it and figure it out every time. So hand error, Gojo would be absolutely broken, because every time he fights a tough opponent and somebody finds a way to bypass infinity or does something else, he will figure out a way around it, creatively or lazily sometimes, right? Like getting rid of the rope that Miguel used against him, or getting rid of all the curse tools that could work against him. But those curse tools would probably also work against Sukuna. So he basically killed both of the weaknesses simultaneously. Because both of those things bypass curse energy completely and bypass durability completely. So that's really the beauty of it. And I think that's how I would describe the genius. One of them is by the books. If I see the it's like seeing an equation, right? Seeing an equation. Okay, that's the difference. Okay. Sukuna sees, like, once you show him the equation, right? He can automatically do that math like permanently, right? Gojo will create the equation, right? So I think Gojo's doing the harder thing, but what Sukuna is doing is more applicable. Does that make sense? So, and I think that's why Sukuna ultimately won that fight, because if Gojo had the same know-how, he'd probably figure out how to defend against that world cutting slash or change his own coordinate, because again he has space-time manipulation, but his technique is the hardest technique to master in the whole verse. So in order for him to reach his heights and be as good as he was, it's almost a much more difficult task, because Sukuna'S curse technique is essentially simple, but he has so many boundless potential. To be honest, everybody's curse technique probably has boundless potential. Megumi's, Yuji's, Utah's, obviously. Utah's is freaking insane. Kenjaku's. Everybody's curse technique has such high potential, but you are the limiting factor. Sukuna'S mentality is almost like continuously learn, and I think that has served him well. Gojo's mentality is continually not learn, but figure shit out. What do you guys think about those genius? I think it's completely unique and different how they both approach Jujutsu, and that's why I think if Gojo, given enough time, had 1,000 years, for example, I think he would easily surpass Sukuna, because in 32 years or so, he was basically matching the strongest sorcerer in history, who had 1,000 years of experience. While whether it was a true living as a curse or living through Yuji and getting all the information from Megumi and all of these things, he had all of these advantages that a lot of people don't like to point out. But these advantages can only be utilized by somebody of his caliber, of his genius. So that's a plus for himself, right? While Gojo's genius is by creatively coming up with equations and solving them, while Sukuna looks at any equation. As long as you showcase the work, he will know what you did, and he will do it as good as you, if not even better. And that's just the difference in the genius. But let me know what you guys think. It's been your boy Supreme Cheer to God. Make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I'm out.